Good morning. Oh, I like that. Thank you for coming. So it's my absolute honor to welcome you to your 6th annual Empathy and Innovation Summit. And I chose that word very specifically, your summit. This is about highlighting the exceptional work that each of you do. In addition to that, I want to thank you for making the sacrifice to be here. There is something you are giving up, whether that's family time, work time, free time, play time. You gave up something to spend your time here, and I appreciate that, and I thank you for that. I'm so thrilled that we are rallying together around the concept of empathy amplified. And I want to talk a little bit about what that means. So it's very clever, right? We're in a rock and roll kind of town that we chose empathy amplified. But it wasn't just that reason that made us choose it. We chose it because I feel like the world needs a little extra empathy. I feel like you and I need a little extra empathy. And I certainly feel like our patients need us to dial it up. Empathy. You've heard that word over and over and over again. And I want to talk about it because we can't drive it if we can't define it properly. Janice Morse, in about 1991, probably captured it the best. I was a nurse, PhD, by the way. And what she did was divide it into 4 domains of empathy: an emotive domain, a moral domain, a cognitive domain, and a behavioral domain. It's relevant to talk about them because without addressing each domain, you cannot drive it. You cannot live it. And so let's talk about the emotive piece of it. What the emotive piece of empathy is the ability we all usually hear about. This concept that we feel what people feel. And not just that we feel what they feel, but we sit with it. You just stay there in the moment. You don't try to page yourself out of it. You stay there. The moral component speaks to the clinician's intrinsic desire to want to feel with someone, to want to be connected, and that's an inherent capacity we all have. The cognitive piece of empathy is really interesting. It's the ability to imagine, but not necessarily feel. So I can imagine what it's like for you to undergo cancer. I can imagine what it's like to hear the words MS, but I don't have to feel it. And that's a very interesting concept when you talk about compassion fatigue and how to maintain resiliency in your caregivers. And the last piece is the behavioral component. Once you've seen it, once you've felt it, you have to be able to respond to it. And that's usually in form of communication. And mind you, all of this rests on the premise that you've actually heard the emotional cue that your patients are sending you, that your colleagues are sending you. So, this year, you're going to hear from some people who are thought leaders in the field of empathy. Some of them have dedicated their entire life to studying this concept. And I'm absolutely thrilled that we're going to put them in front of you. There are 4 themes, I think, that run through this year's summit. And as we think about empathy amplified, I don't want you, as you hear these themes, to think unicorns and rainbows, right? We all sort of hope to walk out of conferences feeling inspired. But I want you to think about these concepts critically. What does it mean? How are we going to translate them into action? And the 4 concepts are the following: transparency, innovation, engagement, and relationships. Let's start with the first, transparency. Transparency is everywhere these days, right? And it has a few key components in my mind that I'd like to nudge your thinking about. The first of which is transparency is important because without transparency, we're not ensuring quality. My colleague, Tim Gilligan, likes to talk about transparency and say it minimizes variance. That's what quality care is. So the more transparency we have, the more quality we will drive. The second piece about transparency in my mind, if you heard me talk about this before, is this idea of self-reflection and reflective competency. One of my favorite terms is unconscious incompetence. Most of us are walking out in the world thinking, I'm a fantastic speaker on stage. Where the truth of the matter is, I'm completely disconnected from my audience, right? Or I communicate really well with my patients, they all like me. We call that unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know. And so when you're thinking about human behavior, unless transparency highlights the blind spots that we all have, people will never be receptive to learning. So I hear a lot about programs we're developing for this reason or that reason, and I want to submit to you that without people recognizing they have a blind spot, they have a reason to learn, there will be no impetus to learn. The next concept is innovation. And we hear that word a lot, and we're thinking about changing it to improvement. And it's important because when you hear the word innovation, you almost feel daunted by the concept, right? Like, how can I possibly be creative enough to innovate something that's never been done before? It feels a little overwhelming to me. And yet, maybe, just maybe, the most innovative thing we could be doing right now is driving home the basics. Driving home empathy amplified, done well. Driving home communication skills, done well. Driving home service excellence, done well. Maybe that's the innovation. The other thing about innovation, and as a nerdy neurologist, As a nerdy neurologist, I can tell you this, that the brain can only handle so much, right? You only have so much RAM, as I've heard it described. And so when you think about it, it's almost overwhelming the things that we could do. There's like 800 possibilities of how you could improve patient experience. And we must choose one or two, maybe, right? We have to choose one. And I'm going to ask you at the end of this conference what your choice is. Because one choice plus 2,000 choices is a movement. Third piece is engagement. What a wonderful concept. We want our patients to be engaged, right? It drives outcomes. It drives our satisfaction. It drives their satisfaction. And yet I want to plant some seeds in your head. One, we don't define patient engagement, our patients do. Two, not all patients want to be engaged. I have an MS practice. My young mothers working with 2 kids hate coming to see me. So asking them to engage in a mobile technology or emailing them every month is a reminder of the disease they don't want to have. Third, we need to be careful, I think, about the definition of engagement as engagement in technology, right? Just because you're clicking on an app, does that mean you're really engaged in your healthcare in a meaningful way? I don't know, I ask you. And lastly, the goal is not to have a bunch of engaged patients and Walking Dead providers, right? That is not the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is relationship engagement. You bring value, I bring value. We're working for a shared common purpose, and we influence each other in a way that's therapeutic. And that brings me to my final point. Relationships in healthcare can be therapeutic. I discovered this in my own practice, if you've heard me share the story, where people who thought they had MS, but they didn't really have MS, I would go into the room and I would say, hi, I'm Dr. Boissy, tell me about yourself. They would say something, I'd say, oh, that's great. I looked at your record and you don't have MS. And they got really mad at me. And I thought, what's the problem? I told you the truth, right? I maintained my professional integrity. I told you the truth. I told you something nobody else told you. But I realized in that moment, after multiple calls to the ombuds office, that giving people that sort of news that's woven into their fabric in the absence of a meaningful relationship was detrimental. And I needed to be more careful about how and when I delivered that information. And maybe the most important thing I could do for others suffering was to focus on investing in the relationship with them and then bring us to a point where I could share that information. Put down my own agenda. What if relationships were the goal? If that's true, what would your conversation sound like? If you decided that the suffering in front of you, when you saw that suffering, that the most therapeutic thing you could do was build a relationship, what would that feel like? Relationships of meaning in healthcare, to me, are the antidote for compassion fatigue and burnout. We know that when you build communities and are connected to your patients, it's therapeutic. Beautiful quote, we heal to be healed. We need to be thinking about what relationships in healthcare really mean. So I give you Empathy Amplified. Hear it, see it, feel it. What does it sound like to you? What does it look like to you? And what does it feel like to you? And if you've got that in your mind, I want you to turn it up. You hear me? I want you to turn it up. And I hope you walk out of this conference dialing it up. On that note, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to someone who has been amplifying empathy for the Cleveland Clinic healthcare system for a number of years now. CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Toby Cosgrove.
Good morning. Oh, please, that's a little pathetic. Good morning. That's more like it. Well, welcome to this summit. This event gets bigger and better and more exciting every year. We have more people from more places, more caregivers from more different disciplines. Empathy, innovation, and patient experience have become a worldwide movement. I'm thrilled that so many of you have taken the time to come to Cleveland to participate in this. You're very special and you are very much appreciated. Our theme this year is Empathy Amplified. In short, communication. Today, healthcare is at an inflection point. Value has replaced volume as a measure of our success. Doctors, nurses, and patients must work together to lower costs and improve outcomes. Healthcare has become a team sport, and each of us will take a turn as a player, a coach, and a referee. Communication is a key skill in this environment. We have to listen, reflect, and share information. It's not enough to be transparent. We need to inspire and to motivate our patients to become active partners in their own care. Communication is the most common medical procedure. Doctors can expect to have more than 200,000 patient interactions in a lifetime. Each interaction is an opportunity to build or strengthen a relationship. And the quality of those relationships will define your career and determine the satisfaction that you take from it. There are many forms of communication. Some of them are nonverbal. I recall back when I ran the casualty staging flight in Da Nang Air Force Base during the Vietnam War. Part of my job was to go from bed to bed to see if the patients were well enough to fly on an airplane. We had 100 beds. I didn't have hours to spend with each patient, but I discovered the importance of touch. Didn't take much. Sometimes it was just a handshake, sometimes it was just a touch on a toe, but the small personal connections made a big difference. Today at the Cleveland Clinic, we understand that patient care is medical, emotional, and physical. Every patient deserves to be acknowledged and respected as an individual. Most of our patients live and work outside the medical environment. They don't have access to professional quality metrics. They rely on their gut. And their gut steers them away from caregivers with poor communication skills. Their instincts are not entirely mistaken. Good communication has a well-documented relationship to clinical quality. Relationship-centered communications is associated with a full range of positive outcomes, from functional improvement to health status and quality of life, to compliance with medical treatment and for self-care. Society is changing. Confidence in healthcare professionals is no longer a given. We have to earn it through our engagement, sharing the hopes and joys of those we serve, listening to their needs, and alleviating their fears. We have a great opportunity as we move forward. Before we move forward, however, in this conference, I want to take a moment to recognize what Adrienne Boissy has done to organize this. You realize that she's put a tremendous amount of effort into it and is a great leader for our activities. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Adrienne. And again, welcome. We're delighted to have you all participants, and we want to learn as much from you as we can possibly during this time. Thank you for being here.